Try to picture absolute nothingness. Close your eyes and attempt to imagine complete emptiness. Most people end up seeing a dark expanse, maybe a few distant stars, but essentially a void. We tend to think of space as a giant empty container, a kind of background where objects are placed. A planet here, a star there, perhaps an astronaut drifting between them. In that picture, space itself is just the absence of things. That picture is wrong. There is no empty container. The idea of space as nothing is one of our deepest misconceptions. The universe is not an empty box holding matter. It behaves more like a continuous substance, something that can stretch, compress, bend, and ripple. Not literally gelatin, of course, but a physical medium with structure and behavior. When you look at the air in front of you, or even into the vacuum between galaxies, you are not seeing emptiness. You are seeing regions filled with fields. These fields exist everywhere, even where there are no particles at all. They respond to mass, energy, and motion, and they influence how objects move and interact. Until this idea sinks in, physics can feel like a collection of strange rules to memorize. Once you understand that reality is built from fields rather than empty space, those rules begin to make sense as descriptions of how the universe itself behaves. Let's start with something you can actually touch. Imagine a big wobbling block of elastic material, a giant cube of jello sitting on a table. Now suppose I reach in, grab a tiny speck of dirt trapped inside that jello, and I pull it. The jello distorts. It stretches. If you want to describe what happened to that block, you can't just say it moved. That's lazy. You have to describe how every single point inside that block shifted relative to every other point. We call this strain. If I pull the corner, the middle moves a little. The far side moves barely at all, and the point under my finger moves a lot. To describe this mess, we need numbers, a lot of numbers. For every tiny point in that jello, we need to know how much it stretched in the x direction, the y direction, and the z direction, and it gets worse. We need to know if it twisted. Did the top slide right while the bottom slid left? That's a shear. Suddenly, this innocent block of jello is a mathematical nightmare. To fully describe the stress and strain inside it, we can't just use a single arrow. We need a tensor, a beast of a mathematical object that packages all these stretches and twists together. But here's the beautiful part. This isn't just about jello. This is how the entire universe works. Physics is the business of assigning numbers to points in space. That's it. That's the job. If you assign a single number to every point in space, like say the temperature, you have a scalar field. Imagine a block of metal that's hot on one side and cold on the other. You can close your eyes and point to any spot inside that metal, and there is a specific number waiting for you, 20 degrees. Move an inch left, 25 degrees. The temperature doesn't jump around randomly, it changes smoothly. It forms a landscape. Now imagine drawing lines connecting all the points that have the exact same temperature. You get these invisible surfaces like the contour lines on a topographic map. We call them isotherms. They are imaginary, but they tell you the shape of the heat. But a single number isn't enough for the interesting stuff. Sometimes the universe has an arrow at every point. Think about a rotating object or water flowing in a river. At every single point in that river, the water has a speed, but it also has a direction. It's going somewhere. You can't just say the water is moving at 5 miles an hour. You have to say 5 mph downstream. This is a vector field. Imagine the room you are sitting in right now. The air seems still, but it isn't. There are tiny currents everywhere. If you could freeze time and attach a tiny little red arrow to every molecule of air, showing where it was going, the room would look like a porcupine. That forest of arrows is a field. Heat flow works the same way. Heat doesn't just sit there, it flows from the hot spots to the cold spots. So superimposed over your scalar field of temperature numbers, there is a vector field of heat flow arrows. And here is the rule. The heat arrow always points downhill. It wants to get away from the hot zone as fast as possible. Now we need a way to connect these two things, the temperature numbers and the flow arrows. How do we find out which way the heat will flow? Just by looking at the temperature map. We use a mathematical machine. We call it del or knob, which is just a fancy name for an upside down triangle symbol. But think of it as a meat grinder for function. You feed it the scalar field, the map of temperatures, and it chews it up and spits out a vector field. This operation is called the gradient, and it is exactly what it sounds like. If you are standing on a hillside in the pitch dark and you want to know which way is up, you feel around with your feet. You find the direction where the slope is steepest. That direction is the gradient. The gradient of the temperature field is a vector that points in the direction of the hottest change. It tells you if you want to get hotter, go that way. And the heat flow, it simply obeys the opposite of the gradient. It runs down the hill. But nature isn't satisfied with just flowing down hills. Sometimes nature likes to spin. Imagine you have a vector field that looks like a whirlpool. The arrows aren't flowing out from a center. They are circling around it. If you drop the leaf in there, it wouldn't just move. It would rotate. To measure this swirliness, we use another operation called the curl. If the gradient measures the slope of the hill, the curl measures how much the field is twisting. It tells you the rotation. And then there's the divergence. This measures how much the stuff is spreading out. If you have a nozzle spraying water, the divergence is high at the nozzle because water is exploding outward. If you have a drain, the divergence is negative because water is vanishing into it. Why am I telling you about hills, swirls, and drains? Because these three concepts, gradient, curl, and divergence, are the language of reality. Maxwell's equations, the laws that govern light, electricity, and your cell phone are just sentences written in this language. They say things like, the divergence of the electric field is the charge. Electric charge is a sprayer that shoots electric field arrows outward. Or, the divergence of the magnetic field is zero. There are no magnetic sprayers, no magnetic charges. Magnetic lines never start or stop. They just loop forever. Speaking of magnetism, this is where things get really weird. You think you know what magnetism is. You played with magnets as a kid. You know they stick to the fridge and hate each other if you flip them around. But have you ever asked why? Why does a wire carrying an electric current suddenly turn into a magnet? Let's look at the Laurent force. It's the rule that says if you shoot a charged particle through a magnetic field, it gets pushed sideways, not forward, not backward, sideways. It's a force that acts perpendicular to the motion. That's bizarre. Gravity pulls you down. Electrical attraction pulls you closer. But magnetism pushes you sideways, like a rude pedestrian shoving you into traffic. The standard explanation involves the right-hand rule. You hold up your hand, point your thumb, curl your fingers, and look like you're trying to hail a taxi while doing yoga. It works, but it's arbitrary. Nature doesn't have hands. Here is the truth. Magnetism is not a separate thing. It's just electricity seen from a moving perspective. Imagine a copper wire. Inside, you have positive copper ions fixed in place and a sea of negative electrons flowing through them like a river. This is the current. Now imagine a single negative charge moving alongside this wire at the exact same speed as the electrons inside the wire. From your perspective, standing still in the lab, you see a current. You check your rule book, and it says, currents create magnetic fields. Okay? The magnetic field pushes the moving charge toward the wire. Simple. But wait, let's look at it from the perspective of the moving charge. If you are the charge, you are looking at the electrons in the wire, and they look stationary relative to you because you're moving at the same speed. If they are stationary, there is no current. If there is no current, there is no magnetic field. So if there is no magnetic field, the force disappears, right? The charge should drift away. Wrong. The charge still gets pushed toward the wire. But how? If the magnetic force vanished, what is pushing it? Einstein steps in. You see, when things move, space itself contracts. It squishes. This is special relativity. From the perspective of our moving charge, the positive ions in the wire, which were stationary in the lab, are now rushing backward. Because they are moving, the distance between them shrinks. They get packed denser. Meanwhile, the electrons in the wire, which are moving with us, appear stationary. Their spacing relaxes. They spread out. Do you see what just happened? The wire, which used to be electrically neutral, now has a higher density of positive charges and a lower density of negative charges. To the moving particle, the wire has suddenly become positively charged. It's not magnetism pulling the particle in. It's good old-fashioned electric attraction. The particle sees a positively charged wire and wants to hug it. So what we call a magnetic field in the lab is just an electric field disguised by relativity. It's what happens to electricity when you start moving. This connects back to our vector field. We said earlier that fields define the force on a charge. We have an electric field vector E and a magnetic field vector B. What we just discovered is that E and B aren't two different actors. They are the same actor changing costumes depending on how fast you run past the stage. If you stand still, you see E. If you run, you see a mix of E and B. They are components of one giant four-dimensional object, the electromagnetic field. But there is a catch. To make this work, charge has to be indestructible. Think about the equation of continuity. It's a fancy way of saying charge is conserved. You can't create electrons out of nothing, and you can't make them vanish. If a current flows out of a box, the amount of charge inside the box must go down. It's basically accounting. If charge wasn't conserved, if it could change depending on your speed, the whole universe would break. Imagine heating up a block of metal. The electrons speed up. If their charge changed because of that speed, the block would suddenly become electrically charged just because it got hot. Massive sparks would fly every time you made toast. Since your toaster doesn't kill you usually, we know charge is an invariant scalar. It's the same number no matter how fast you go. Now let's go back to those magnetic field lines. Remember, divergence of B is 0, no magnetic charges. This means magnetic field lines have to form closed loops. They are like rubber bands that never break. If you have a straight wire, the field lines circle around it. If you have a loop of wire, the field lines thread through the middle and wrap around the outside looking like a donut. This creates the magnetic dipole. It's the basic unit of magnetism. You don't have a north pole and a south pole sitting separately. You have a loop. The north is just the side where the lines come out, and the south is where they go in. But here is a question that should bother you. Where do the lines go when they hit the end of a bar magnet? They don't stop. They go through the magnet. A permanent magnet is just a solenoid that doesn't need a battery. Inside that iron bar, billions of tiny electrons are spinning. Each spinning electron is a tiny current loop. In iron, these loops decide to line up and sing in the same choir. The result is a macroscopic magnetic field. So there is no magic magnetic fluid inside the iron. It's just currents, permanent atomic currents that never stop flowing. But we are still describing this with lines and loops. Is that what's really there? Are there invisible spaghetti strings filling the room? Of course not. The lines are just a drawing tool. What's really there is the vector potential. And this is where we have to abandon the high school pictures entirely and look at the machinery under the floorboard, because it turns out the magnetic field B might just be a derivative of something more fundamental, something we call A. We left off with a cliffhanger. We stripped away the magnetic field lines and realized they are just cartoons. We realized that magnetism and electricity are the same thing, just viewed from different speeds. But if we want to calculate this mess, if we want to actually predict what the universe will do next, we need to talk about the ghost in the machine. We need to talk about in electrostatics, life is easy. You have a scalar potential voltage. It's like height on a topographic map. If you know the voltage everywhere, you just roll the ball down the hill, and that's your electric field. Simple. But magnetism is a headache because the magnetic field doesn't act like a hill. It acts like a whirlpool. It has a curl. So we can't represent it with a simple scalar number. We need a vector potential. We call it think of A as the momentum of if you have a flow of electric current, it drags the universe along with it. The current creates a river of this vector potential flowing in the same direction. The magnetic field is just the swirl that happens around the edges of this flow. Now, is it real or is it just a mathematical trick to make our equations pretty? In classical physics, you can treat it as a trick. You can add any random value to A, and it doesn't change the physical magnetic field at all. Just like changing sea level doesn't change the steepness of a mountain. But in more advanced physics, quantum mechanics, this ghost field turns out to be the main character. It's the thing that actually matters. If you don't like ghosts, you can do it the hard way. You can calculate the magnetic field directly from the currents using a beast of a formula called the Biot-Savart law. Imagine breaking a wire into infinite tiny pieces. Each little piece of current screams out a magnetic command to the rest of the universe. The Biot-Savart law is just the sum of all those screams. It's a messy calculation involving cross products and inverse squares, but it tells us something profound. The field at any point is the sum of the influences of every moving charge in the universe weighted by distance. This leads us to the dipole, the fundamental atom of magnetism. Since we can't have magnetic charges, the smallest magnetic object is a tiny loop of current. Far away from a complicated mess of wires, everything starts to look like a simple dipole. It doesn't matter if your current loop is a square, a circle, or a triangle. From a distance, the universe doesn't care about the shape. It only cares about the magnetic moment, the current times the area. This is why atoms with their spinning electrons behave like tiny bar magnet. They are microscopic loops. Now I want to pivot. We've been talking about fields as if they are these ethereal magical clouds. But to truly understand the vacuum, you need to think of it as a solid object. You need to think about jello. Again, when we study the mechanics of solid materials, elasticity, we find the exact same mathematics that governs the vacuum of space. Consider a glob of jello that is twisted and squashed. To describe the internal state of that jello, we can't just say it's under pressure. Pressure is a scalar. It pushes everywhere equally. But in a solid, you can push on one face and pull on another. You can shear it. We describe this internal torture with a stress tensor. It's not a single number. It's a matrix of forces. It tells you the force in the x direction on the face perpendicular to the axis and so on. And how does the material respond? It deforms. We call this strain. If a point inside the material moves, we describe that displacement with a vector. The strain isn't just the displacement, it's the change in displacement from one point to the next. It's the stretching and the twisting. This is defined by the strain tensor. This tensor has 6 independent numbers that tell you exactly how every patch of space is being warped. Why am I talking about jello in a physics script? Because energy doesn't care what it's made of. When you squeeze a spring, you store energy. When you shear a block of metal, you store energy. The amount of energy stored depends on the product of the stress, how hard you push, and the strain, how much it moves. This is true for the vacuum of space too. An electric field is a stress. A magnetic field is a stress. The empty space between stars is loaded with potential energy stored in the electromagnetic fields, just like energy is stored in a twisted rubber band. If you understand Hooke's law that stress is proportional to strain, you understand the basic machinery of existence. In a solid, if you kick it, a wave travels through it. We call it sound. The speed of that sound depends on how stiff the material is and how heavy it is. In the vacuum, if you kick the electromagnetic field, a wave travels through it. We call it light. The speed of light is determined by the stiffness of the vacuum, just like the speed of sound is determined by the stiffness of a rock. Here's where the comparison gets interesting. Real materials are never perfectly rigid. Pull a spring hard enough and it eventually snaps. Stretch a piece of chalk and it breaks, but notice the direction of the break. When chalk is pulled straight apart, it fractures at a right angle to the force. That happens because chalk is weak under tension. It cannot withstand being stretched. Twist that same piece of chalk, however, and it breaks along a spiral roughly at a 45-degree angle. The reason is subtle. Twisting creates shear, and mathematically, shear can be rewritten as tension acting at an angle. The chalk still fails due to tension, but the geometry hides where that tension lies. Nature is full of effects like this, where the underlying cause is disguised by form. Some materials behave in even more surprising ways. Plastic film, for example, slowly uncrumples after being squeezed. It seems to remember its shape because of internal resistance and slow flow within its structure. Space does not tear or flow like ordinary matter, but the mathematics used to describe stress, strain, and deformation still applies. Einstein used this same mathematical language, borrowed from engineering and geology, to describe gravity. He treated the universe as something flexible, capable of bending and warping. The quantum vacuum, then, is not emptiness. It is a medium filled with fields, described by scalars, vectors, and tensors, quietly shaping how reality behaves.